Quicksand doesn't work the way Hollywood showed you, and Native Americans knew a counterintuitive survival trick that sounds completely backwards. What they did with their bodies defied every instinct you'd have in that moment, and it's the reason they walked out alive. When you're sinking into quicksand, your first instinct screams, "Get out now!" But here's what Native Americans figured out centuries ago. Panic is quicksand's best friend. The faster your heart pounds, the deeper you sink. Think about it like this. When you're terrified, your body tenses up like a rock. Rocks sink fast. But what if you could turn yourself into something that floats? Well, that's exactly what these survival experts mastered. Native American children learned breathing techniques that would make yoga instructors jealous. Deep, slow breaths through the nose, 4 counts in, hold for 4, then 4 counts out. This wasn't just feel-good meditation stuff. This was life or death science. Controlled breathing slowed their heart rate from hummingbird speed to turtle pace. Here's the weird part. The calmer you become, the more buoyant your body gets in quicksand. It's like quicksand has a built-in lie detector. Freak out, down you go. Stay cool as a cucumber, you practically float on top. Tribal elders didn't just teach techniques, they told stories that stuck. Stories about the warrior who panicked and disappeared into the earth forever. Stories about the wise hunter who breathed slowly, stayed calm, and walked away to tell the tale. These weren't bedtime stories. They were survival manuals disguised as entertainment. But why does panic make everything worse? When fear kicks in, your muscles burn through oxygen like a sports car burns through gas. You start making sloppy decisions. Your vision narrows. You miss obvious escape routes. Plus, all that thrashing around, it's like mixing cake batter. You're just making the quicksand looser and more dangerous. Native Americans understood something modern people often forget. Patience isn't just a virtue, it's a survival skill. While panic says, do something now, wisdom whispers, do the right thing slowly. The difference between these two approaches often meant the difference between going home to your family or becoming a cautionary tale. Makes sense, right? Fear turns smart people into their own worst enemy. It's like your brain switches from GPS mode to pinball machine mode. Lots of noise and movement, but no real direction. The most experienced survivors knew that surviving quicksand started before they ever touched the stuff. Mental preparation beat physical strength every single time. They trained their minds like athletes train their muscles. And speaking of training, controlling your breathing and heart rate is just the foundation. Once you've mastered staying calm, you need to know exactly how to position your body to maximize your chances of escape. Ever tried to walk on a waterbed? Your feet sink right through, don't they? Well, Native Americans figured out something brilliant about quicksand that most people still don't know today. When you're standing upright in quicksand, all your weight pushes down through 2 tiny foot-sized spots. That's like trying to balance a bowling ball on a couple of golf tees. No wonder people sink fast. But here's where ancient wisdom gets interesting. The moment someone hit quicksand, experienced tribal members would immediately lie flat on their backs. Sounds crazy, right? Your first instinct screams, stand up and run. But they knew better. Lying down spreads your body weight across maybe 15 times more surface area. It's the difference between poking the mud with a pencil versus pressing it with your whole hand. Then there's the floating trick that'll blow your mind. Human bodies are naturally less dense than quicksand. We're basically walking water balloons compared to that thick, heavy muck. When you're horizontal on your back, you actually float higher than when you're vertical. Your grandfather probably never told you that one during his fishing stories. The wide arm technique came next. Picture yourself making snow angels, but slower and with way more at stake. Arms stretched wide, legs spread apart. It's like turning yourself into a human starfish. This position gives you maximum stability and prevents that terrifying feeling of tilting sideways into deeper trouble. But here's the part that separated the survivors from the statistics. Moving to safety required the patience of a chess master and the grace of a ballet dancer. No sudden movements, no panic-induced scrambling, just slow, deliberate shifts toward firmer ground. Smart tribal members treated their bodies like delicate instruments during escape. They gently work one arm towards solid earth, then gradually shift their weight in that direction. The whole process might take 20 or 30 minutes, but rushing meant disaster. The beauty of this horizontal method? It actually works against quicksand's sneaky physics. When you're upright and struggling, the sand particles pack tighter around your legs with each movement. But when you're flat and patient, you're working with the natural buoyancy instead of fighting it. Of course, knowing how to distribute your weight properly was just the beginning. The real masters understood that even perfect positioning meant nothing without the right kind of movement. And speaking of movement, the way they escaped once they were horizontal, that's where things get really interesting. You know what's fascinating? Native Americans figured out something that still trips up modern people today. When you're stuck in quicksand, your first instinct screams, "Get out now!" But that's exactly what'll sink you faster than a rock. These indigenous survivors had a completely different approach. Slow and steady wasn't just a nice saying, it was life or death wisdom. Here's the thing about quicksand physics that they understood without fancy science degrees. Every sudden kick sends shockwaves through that muddy mess, and guess what? Those waves come right back to grab you deeper. It's like the ground is playing tug of war, and it's got home field advantage. Smart tribes taught their kids a simple rule: one limb at a time, always. Never both legs thrashing together like some panicked fish. Never both arms flailing around like you're conducting an invisible orchestra. One careful movement, pause, breathe, then the next. The wiggle technique sounds almost silly until you try it. Instead of yanking your foot straight up, which creates suction that'd make a shop vacuum jealous, they gently rotate their ankle back and forth. Tiny movements that gradually broke the seal between skin and mud. Think about opening a stubborn pickle jar. You don't just muscle it off, right? You twist a little, release pressure, twist again. Same principle, except the jar is trying to swallow your leg. But here's where it gets really clever. They discovered that struggling hard actually changed the quicksand's consistency, making it thicker and grabbier. Light movements? The sand stayed more liquid, easier to work with. I've watched people today make the exact opposite mistake. Panic hits, and they start doing jumping jacks in place. Might as well send the quicksand an engraved invitation to their funeral. Then there's the energy problem. Wild thrashing burns through your strength faster than a teenager goes through phone battery. After 5 minutes of crazy struggling, you're exhausted and stuck exactly where you started. Maybe deeper. Native Americans saved their energy like it was precious currency. Because in quicksand, it absolutely was. The patience part probably drove some people nuts. Every instinct screams for speed when you're trapped. But these survivors knew that 15 minutes of careful, methodical movement beat hours of frantic fighting any day of the week. Makes sense when you think about it, right? The ground isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. At least, not quickly. Speaking of going places, movement was only half the battle. The really smart tribes carried certain tools that turned quicksand from a death trap into just another inconvenience. Native Americans weren't just smart about staying calm and moving right, they were absolute masters at using whatever Mother Nature left lying around. And trust me, when you're stuck in quicksand, you suddenly become very creative with a stick. The secret weapon? Strong roots and sturdy branches. These weren't just random grabbing points. They were lifelines. Experienced travelers knew which trees had deep, reliable root systems near dangerous areas. Willows and cottonwoods were favorites because their roots spread wide and held firm. Smart, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Many tribes carried simple poles when crossing risky terrain. Not fancy equipment, just straight, solid sticks about as long as their body. Why? Well, if someone started sinking, they'd lay that pole horizontally across the quicksand surface. Instant support beam. The pole distributed weight over a much larger area, giving them something stable to grab while working free. Then there's the footwear genius. Moccasins weren't just comfortable, they were survival gear. Light leather meant less weight pulling down into the muck. Plus, if a shoe did get trapped, losing a moccasin wasn't like losing a heavy boot. You could slip your foot out and keep moving. Modern hiking boots? Good luck getting those back. Native Americans also understood that sometimes you had to sacrifice to survive. Carrying a heavy pack or tools while sinking? Drop them. Your life's worth more than your stuff. This wasn't wasteful. It was practical. A lighter body escaped faster, and you could always make new tools later. The really clever part was improvisation. Found a fallen branch? Perfect rescue pole for the next person. Discovered some sturdy bark? It could become a makeshift platform or even rope when twisted right. They saw potential rescue tools everywhere because their survival depended on it. And the weird part is how they test these natural aids before trusting them completely. A quick tug on that root, a bounce test on that branch. Nothing worse than grabbing what you think is solid support only to have it snap when you need it most. Talk about adding insult to injury. These weren't desperate moves either. They were calculated strategies passed down through generations. Each tribe knew which local plants and trees offered the best emergency assistance in their specific terrain. But even the smartest use of natural tools meant nothing without other people around to help. Because sometimes, no matter how clever you were with sticks and roots, you needed human hands to pull you to safety. Nobody survives quicksand alone. Well, technically they can, but why make it harder than it needs to be? Native Americans figured this out centuries before we started making action movies about solo heroes. They traveled in groups through risky terrain because math is simple. 2 heads beat 1, especially when one head might be stuck up to its neck in mud. Their rope game was impressive. Plant fibers twisted into strong lifelines that could handle a person's full weight. Hemp, willow bark, even tough grasses became rescue gear. The trick wasn't just having rope, though. It was knowing how to use it without turning the rescuer into victim number 2. Picture the human chain method. The stuck person grabs the rope. The rescuer stays on solid ground, maybe 10 feet back. Sometimes a third person anchors the rescuer. Smart, right? Nobody wants to explain to the chief how one quicksand victim became 3. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just yank people out like starting a stubborn lawnmower. That's a young person's mistake. The rescue happened in stages. Gentle pulling while the victim did that slow, wiggling motion we talked about earlier. Patience saved energy for everyone involved. Teams also meant better problem solving. One person might spot the sturdy branch. Another finds the right angle for the pull. The third keeps watch for more dangerous spots nearby. Division of labor works whether you're building a house or escaping nature's glue trap. The psychological benefit was huge, too. Being stuck alone meant fighting panic by yourself. Having teammates nearby, that calm voice saying, "Take your time, we've got you," made all the difference. Fear makes quicksand worse, but hope makes everything better. They practiced these rescues during safe times. Kids learned the techniques before they needed them. Makes sense, right? You don't want the first time using a rope rescue to be the actual emergency. That's like learning to drive during a police chase. Group travel also meant shared knowledge. The elder who remembered where the bad spots were, the tracker who could read warning signs and animal behavior, the strong swimmer who wasn't afraid of waterlogged areas. Everyone brought something useful to the survival equation. Well, there's another reason teams work better than solo travel, but it wasn't just about having extra hands for rescue situations. The real advantage came from something most people never think about: reading the landscape itself and knowing exactly where danger lurked before anyone took a single risky step. You know what separates someone who walks confidently through dangerous terrain from someone who becomes a cautionary tale? The ability to read what the land is actually telling them. Native Americans developed an almost supernatural talent for spotting quicksand before it spotted them. Well, maybe not supernatural, but pretty darn impressive. They knew that nature always leaves clues. You just have to know what to look for. The ground itself was their first teacher. Healthy, solid earth had a certain color and texture that experienced eyes could recognize instantly. But quicksand? That stuff looked different. Darker patches often meant water was pooling underneath. Areas that seemed oddly smooth or flat in otherwise rough terrain were major red flags. Then there's the brilliant trick of watching where animals refuse to go. Think about it. If a deer trail suddenly curves around a perfectly walkable-looking spot, there's probably a good reason. Animals don't take detours for fun. Their survival instincts are razor sharp, and they've learned the hard way where the ground can't be trusted. But the really smart move was the object test. Before stepping into questionable areas, they'd grab a rock or stick and toss it ahead. Solid ground made one sound, quicksand made another, usually a wet thud followed by the object slowly disappearing. Makes sense, right? Rivers and lakes created the trickiest situations because that's where quicksand loved to hide. The combination of water and fine sand or silt created perfect conditions for these natural traps. Areas near water sources that looked suspiciously damp or had that telltale shimmer were automatic no-go zones. And here's something most people miss. Animal tracks told stories. Fresh footprints that suddenly stopped or showed signs of struggle were like prehistoric crime scenes. Smart travelers learned to follow established animal paths that had been tested by countless hooves and paws over time. The weird part is how simple it all sounds when you break it down. Look for color changes, watch animal behavior, test suspicious ground, follow proven paths. But combining all these observations while moving through unfamiliar territory, that took serious skill and constant attention. Their eyes were trained to catch details that modern people would walk right past. A slightly different shade of brown here, an area where grass grew differently there, or spots where morning dew lingered longer than it should. Yet, even with all this knowledge, timing still played a crucial role in their survival strategies. Weather wasn't just something Native Americans complained about over morning coffee. It was literally life or death when it came to quicksand survival. Rain turned solid ground into death traps faster than you could say, bad hair day. Those gentle spring showers that city folks love, they transformed harmless dirt into hungry quicksand pits. Smart tribes knew this. When storm clouds gathered, they'd hunker down and wait it out rather than risk becoming nature's next victim. But here's where it gets interesting. Early morning became their secret weapon. While most of us are still hitting the snooze button, they were already moving across potentially dangerous terrain. The cooler temperatures meant firmer ground. Think of it like walking on day-old pizza versus fresh from the oven cheese. One's manageable, the other's a gooey mess. Coastal tribes had an extra layer of complexity to deal with. Tides weren't just pretty ocean movements to admire. High tide meant water-saturated sand that could swallow a person whole. Low tide? That was their golden hour. They'd time beach crossings like we time traffic to avoid rush hour, except the stakes were considerably higher than being late for work. Spring floods presented another fascinating challenge. Melting snow and heavy rains didn't just fill rivers, they created temporary quicksand zones where none existed before. Experienced travelers would literally camp out for days, waiting for water levels to drop. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was survival strategy number one. The real genius lay in seasonal planning. Different times of year brought different risks. Summer heat could dry out some quicksand areas, making them safer, but it could also concentrate moisture in others, creating new danger zones. Fall brought its own surprises as leaves covered warning signs that experienced eyes normally caught. Weather patterns became as important as knowing which berries were poisonous. A warm, dry week might open up previously impassable routes. A sudden thunderstorm could close them just as quickly. Modern meteorologists have nothing on these folks when it came to reading nature's mood swings. Then there's the psychological aspect nobody talks about. Waiting isn't fun when you're hungry or need to reach somewhere important, but rushing through dangerous terrain during bad conditions turned minor inconveniences into major disasters. They understood something we've forgotten in our rush world. Sometimes the fastest way forward is standing still until conditions improve. Nature sets the schedule, not us. Speaking of schedules, timing wasn't just about weather patterns. Knowing when to call for help and how to communicate danger to others could mean the difference between a close call and a tragedy. You know what's funny? Modern families can barely agree on a pizza topping, but Native American tribes managed to pass down life-saving quicksand knowledge for generations without losing a single detail. Talk about priorities, right? Their storytelling wasn't just entertainment around the campfire. These survival lessons got woven into tales that stuck in young minds like superglue. Kids didn't just hear about quicksand dangers once and forget them. They heard the same wisdom retold dozens of times, each story reinforcing the critical rules. Stay calm, spread your weight, move slowly, but here's where it gets really clever. They developed hand signals that could save lives from a distance. One raised fist meant stop immediately. Someone ahead had spotted danger. A sweeping arm motion warned others to circle around a hazardous area. These silent communications prevented the whole group from walking into trouble. Well, silence wasn't always the answer. When someone actually got trapped, they needed rescue calls that carried far without causing panic. Their shouts were specific and clear, not just random screaming. Mud trap or sand pit told rescuers exactly what equipment to grab and how to approach safely. Then there were the clan elders, basically walking GPS systems with decades of local knowledge stored in their heads. They remembered every quicksand incident, every seasonal danger zone, every safe crossing point. This wasn't casual conversation either. Mapping dangerous areas was serious business that could mean the difference between a successful hunting trip and a funeral. And the weird part is how they compressed all this complex survival information into simple, memorable phrases. Stay together, move slow, watch the ground. 5 words that could prevent disaster. Try explaining modern safety protocols in 5 words. Good luck with that. These communication systems created layers of protection. Individual knowledge backed up by group awareness, backed up by historical memory, backed up by clear emergency procedures. Makes sense, right? The really smart part? They didn't wait for emergencies to practice these communication methods. Daily travel included constant small warnings and observations. A pointed finger here, a whispered caution there. By the time real danger appeared, everyone knew their role in the survival dance. Their approach created something modern emergency responders would recognize: redundant safety systems where multiple people watched for multiple dangers using multiple communication methods. Nothing left to chance, nothing assumed, nothing forgotten. But why did this system work so perfectly when other survival knowledge sometimes got lost over time? The answer reveals something fascinating about how humans actually learn and remember critical information that could save their lives.